The shot was impossible. Everyone at China Lake knew it. 4,000 meters of high desert stretched between the firing position and the target, a distance so extreme that the bullet would travel for nearly 6 seconds before impact, dropping over 200 feet while the wind pushed it sideways by margins that could be measured in car lengths. 12 of the Navy's finest snipers had tried. 12 had failed, and Chief Petty Officer Linnea Voss had watched every single attempt without saying a word. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from today. Maybe you know someone in the military who has been underestimated, someone whose quiet strength went unnoticed until the moment it mattered most. The proving grounds sat in a bowl of rust-colored mountains east of Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, where the government tested things that did not officially exist. Project Longbow was one of those things. A classified initiative to push the boundaries of long-range engagement beyond anything previously documented. Billions in funding hung on one question. Could a human being consistently hit a target at 4,000 meters? Lieutenant Commander Tobias Falk stood behind the observation line with his arms crossed, watching another failure through his spotting scope. Petty Officer First Class Evan Sykes from SEAL Team 4 had just sent his third round in the dirt, 18 inches left of the steel silhouette that seemed to shimmer in the morning heat. Sykes lowered his rifle and shook his head. "That makes 9, Falk said to no one in particular. 9 of my best shooters, and not one of them can touch it." Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Odom stood nearby, his weathered face revealing nothing. He had seen enough failures in his 45 years to know that watching them never got easier. But his attention kept drifting to the woman organizing equipment cases near the supply tent. Voss moved with quiet efficiency, cataloging ammunition and cleaning rifles that would be used for attempts she was not permitted to make. Odom had read her file. He knew about the 12 confirmed kills in Helmand Province. He knew about the classified operation that earned her a Bronze Star with Valor Device. And he knew about the 18 months since she had last pulled a trigger at distance, though the file did not explain why. Senior Chief Petty Officer Wade Crenshaw approached the firing line for the 10th attempt. At 6'2" with shoulders that blocked the sun, Crenshaw carried himself like a man who had never been second best at anything. His record supported the confidence. Longest confirmed Navy kill at 2,847 meters. 3 combat tours with SEAL Team 6. The kind of reputation that made junior operators speak his name in whispers. He glanced toward the supply tent as he passed, his lip curling slightly. Odom caught the look. "Something on your mind, Senior Chief?" Crenshaw settled behind his rifle, a custom 408 Chaitak that cost more than most cars. "Just wondering why we have support staff on a classified range, Master Chief. Seems like a security risk." "Chief Voss has the clearance," Odom said evenly. "Chief Voss has a lot of things she should not have." Crenshaw pressed his eye to the scope. "But that is a conversation for another time." The desert fell silent as Crenshaw began his breathing ritual. Voss paused her work, watching from 200 yards away. Her pale blue eyes tracked the wind indicators, the mirage rising from the sand, the almost imperceptible shift in the flags of the 1,000-meter markers. Her lips moved slightly, running calculations that no one asked her to make. Crenshaw fired. The rifle thundered across the proving grounds. 6 seconds of silence followed. "Miss," the spotter called. 14 inches right, 6 inches high. Crenshaw did not move for a long moment. When he finally rose, his face had hardened into something between fury and disbelief. He walked past Voss without acknowledgement, though his shoulder came close enough to brush hers. She did not flinch. 3 more shooters followed. 3 more failures. By the time the sun reached its peak, 12 of the finest snipers in naval special warfare had proven that 4,000 meters was beyond human capability. Falk removed his cap and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we are suspending trials for the day. I need to make some calls to Washington." The gathered operators began packing their gear, conversations muted by disappointment. Odom watched Voss collect the spent brass casings, her movements mechanical but her eyes distant. Something about the way she looked at the distant target made him pause. "Chief Voss," he called. She straightened. Master Chief, those calculations you were running during Senior Chief Crenshaw's attempt. What did they tell you? Voss hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the brass in her palm. She glanced toward Crenshaw, who was loading his equipment into a vehicle 50 yards away. The wind shear at the 2,000-meter mark was shifting every 40 seconds, she said quietly. He fired during transition. His holdover was correct for the conditions 3 seconds earlier. Odom studied her face. And you saw that from the supply tent. It was not a question. Voss did not answer. She did not need to. That night, as the desert cooled and the stars emerged in numbers that city dwellers never witnessed, Linnea Voss sat alone on an equipment crate behind the barracks. In her hand was a photograph, creased and worn at the edges. A young man in desert camouflage smiled at the camera, his arm draped over her shoulder. She touched the scar on her left temple, remembering dust and blood and a voice that told her she never missed. Tomorrow, Crenshaw would make attempt number 13. If he failed, Project Longbow would be canceled, and everyone would go home believing the shot was impossible. But Voss knew something they did not. The shot was not impossible. It simply required someone willing to see what others could not. She folded the photograph and slipped it back into her pocket. In the distance, the target waited in the darkness, for 1,000 meters of doubt between her and a truth she had spent 18 months trying to forget. The equipment room smelled of gun oil and solvent, a familiar comfort that Voss had known since her first days in the Navy. She arrived before dawn, when the desert was still cold and the proving grounds lay silent beneath a purple sky. A single lamp illuminated the workbench where she spread her calculations, pages filled with numbers that told a story the other shooters had failed to read. Wind speed at surface level meant nothing at 4,000 meters. The bullet would pass through at least 3 distinct atmospheric layers, each with its own temperature gradient and crosswind pattern. The mirage that rippled above the sand created optical distortions that could shift a point of aim by several inches. And then there was the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, nudging the bullet sideways during its 6-second flight. Most snipers accounted for 1 or 2 of these variables. Voss accounted for all of them. She heard footsteps on the concrete floor and did not look up. "You're here early," a voice said. Petty Officer First Class Declan Yates leaned against the doorframe, a coffee cup in each hand. At 28, he was the youngest sniper in the longbow trials, known more for his confidence than his patience. He had missed his 3 attempts by margins that suggested talent without refinement. "Could not sleep," Voss replied. Yates approached the workbench and set one of the cups near her elbow. He glanced at the papers spread before her, his eyebrows rising. "What is all this?" "Math. I can see that." He picked up one of the pages, scanning the dense calculations. "This is ballistic data for the 4,000-meter shot. You factored in the thermal layers?" "Yes." "And the wind shear at the 2,000-meter mark?" "Yes." Yates set the paper down slowly. His expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to respect. "These calculations are better than anything our team produced. And we had 3 days and a computer." Voss said nothing. She reached for the coffee and took a sip, her eyes still fixed on the numbers. "Why are you doing support work?" Yates asked. "I looked you up after yesterday. You qualified expert on every weapon system the Navy has. You have combat deployments. You should be on that firing line, not cleaning our brass." The question hung in the air between them. Voss set down the cup and finally met his eyes. Her gaze was steady but guarded, like a door that had been locked for a long time. "I have my reasons," she said. Before Yates could press further, the door swung open and Senior Chief Crenshaw filled the frame. His eyes moved from Yates to Voss to the papers on the workbench, and his jaw tightened. "Cozy," he said. "Swapping recipes?" "Just getting coffee, Senior Chief." Yates straightened slightly, the easy confidence in his voice wavering. Crenshaw stepped into the room, his presence filling the space like a change in air pressure. He picked up one of Voss's calculation sheets and studied it with theatrical interest. "Looks like someone has been doing homework." He turned to Voss. "Tell me, Chief, if you're so smart, why are you not out there taking shots with the rest of us?" "I was not invited," Voss said evenly. Crenshaw laughed, a short, harsh sound. You were not invited because this program requires shooters who can perform under pressure. Real operators. Not paper pushers who froze up and got pulled from the line. The words landed like a slap. Yates glanced at Voss, waiting for her reaction, but her expression did not change. Only her hands betrayed her, fingers pressing flat against the workbench with controlled force. Crenshaw leaned closer. I know what happened in Helmand Province, he said quietly. I know why you have not taken a real shot in 18 months. And I know that whatever is broken inside, you cannot be fixed by scribbling numbers in an equipment room. He dropped the paper onto the bench. Stay in your lane, Chief. Let the professionals handle this. He walked out without waiting for a response. The silence he left behind felt heavier than his presence. Yates exhaled slowly. That guy is a piece of work. Voss gathered her papers with steady hands, though something in her eyes had dimmed. He is not wrong about everything. What happened in Helmand? She paused, the papers pressed against her chest. A long moment passed before she answered. I made a shot, and someone I cared about died because of it. Yates opened his mouth to respond, but the morning horn sounded across the base, signaling the start of the day's operations. Voss tucked her calculations into a folder and moved toward the door. For what it is worth, Yates called after her, I think you can make that shot. I think you might be the only one here who can. Voss stopped in the doorway. She did not turn around. That is not worth much if no one gives me the chance. The briefing room filled with operators and observers as Lieutenant Commander Falk took his position at the front. A large screen displayed the target zone, the 4,000-meter marker glowing red like a warning. Gentlemen, Falk began, yesterday was not our finest hour. 12 attempts, 12 failures. Washington is getting nervous, and frankly, so am I. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. However, we have one more shooter who has not yet attempted the shot. Senior Chief Crenshaw has requested the opportunity to make attempt number 13. A murmur rippled through the room. Crenshaw stood near the front, his arms crossed, his expression radiating confidence. If Senior Chief Crenshaw fails, Falk continued, I've been instructed to suspend the program pending a full review. That review will likely result in termination. He looked around the room. This is it, gentlemen. One shot to prove this program has a future. From the back of the room, Master Chief Odom watched Voss slip through the door and take a position against the wall. Her folder of calculations was tucked under her arm. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, showing the distant target. Odom had made a career of reading people. He had seen fear and courage and everything in between. And in Linnea Voss, he saw something that the others had missed entirely. He saw someone who already knew the answer to a question no one had thought to ask her. Crenshaw accepted handshakes and words of encouragement as the room prepared to move to the range. Voss remained motionless against the wall, invisible to everyone except the one person who had learned to look. Tomorrow would bring Crenshaw's attempt. If he succeeded, he would cement his legend. If he failed, the program would die. But Odom suspected there was a third option that no one had considered yet, and he intended to be ready when it revealed itself. The morning sun turned the desert into a furnace by the time Crenshaw took his position on the firing line. Heat waves rose from the sand in shimmering curtains, distorting the distant target into something that seemed to breathe and shift. Every operator on the range knew these conditions made the shot even harder than the day before. Crenshaw did not seem concerned. He moved through his preparation ritual with the precision of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Rifle positioned, bipod adjusted, scope dialed to the exact specifications he had calculated the night before. His spotter, a young petty officer named Hendricks, lay beside him with a high-powered scope trained on the target. Wind reading, Crenshaw said. 6 miles per hour from the east, shifting to 8, Hendricks replied. Mirage is heavy. I'm seeing a full boil out past 2,000 meters. Crenshaw made a small adjustment to his scope. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate to the methodical rhythm that preceded every kill he had ever made. This was his arena. This was where legends were written. Voss stood near the equipment tent, her position unchanged from the previous day. But today her folder remained closed at her side. Today she simply watched, her eyes tracking the same indicators that Hendricks called out, her mind running the same calculations that Crenshaw dialed into his scope. She saw the problem before he fired. The wind at surface level was shifting east to west, but the flags at the 1,000-meter markers told a different story. A crosswind was building in the middle distance, the kind of lateral shear that developed when morning thermals collided with the cooler air trapped in the valley. Crenshaw was compensating for the wind he could see. He was not compensating for the wind that would find his bullet 2 seconds into its flight. Crenshaw fired. The rifle cracked across the desert, and I turned to follow the invisible path of the bullet. 6 seconds stretched into eternity. Hendricks pressed his eye to the scope, waiting for the impact. "Miss," he announced. 12 inches right, 4 inches low. Crenshaw did not move. His finger remained on the trigger guard, his body frozen in the position of a man who could not accept what he had just heard. "Confirm that," he said quietly. "Confirmed, Senior Chief. 12 right for low." The silence that followed was absolute. Crenshaw rose slowly, his movements stiff with controlled rage. He removed his ear protection and stood facing the distant target as if he could will the result to change through sheer force of personality. Lieutenant Commander Falk lowered his binoculars. His face had aged 10 years in 6 seconds. "That is 13 attempts," he said. 13 failures. He turned to address the assembled personnel. "Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your efforts over these past 3 days. I will be contacting Washington within the hour to recommend suspension of Project Longbow." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. Operators who had trained for months to be here began gathering their equipment, their postures heavy with defeat. Crenshaw remained motionless on the firing line, staring at a target he had been certain he would hit. Voss felt the photograph in her pocket pressing against her thigh. Danny's face surfaced in her memory, smiling in the Afghan sun, his voice cutting through the noise of a firefight. "You never miss, Linnea. That is what makes you dangerous." She had missed once. Not the shot itself, but the moment afterward. The moment when she should have moved faster, reacted quicker, done something other than watch the man who believed in her take a bullet meant for her own head. Her hands began to tremble. She pressed them flat against her thighs and forced herself to breathe. "Is there anyone else?" The question came from Falk, directed at no one in particular. A formality, really, a way to close the chapter before making the call that would end the program. Odom's eyes found Voss across the range. He watched her internal battle play out in the small movements of her body, the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened, the moment her hands stopped shaking and curled into fists. She had a choice: stay silent and remain invisible, let the program die and return to a life of equipment maintenance and quiet regret, or speak 3 words that would change everything. The photograph pressed against her leg. Danny's voice echoed in her mind. "You never miss. Let me try." The words were quiet, but in the silence of the defeated range, they carried like thunder. Every head turned toward the equipment tent where Linnea Voss stood with her folder of calculations and 18 months of ghosts. Crenshaw spun around, his expression twisting from shock to contempt. "Excuse me?" Voss stepped forward, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "I said let me try." Falk stared at her, as if she had sprouted a second head. "Chief, this is a precision shooting trial. You're support personnel. I'm a qualified Navy SEAL sniper with 12 confirmed kills and a Bronze Star for valor," Voss replied. "I have the clearance. I have the training. And I have calculations that account for variables your shooters did not consider." The range had gone completely still. Yates watched from near the ammunition supply, a small smile forming at the corner of his mouth. Odom remained motionless, his expression unreadable. Crenshaw stepped toward her, his bulk casting a shadow across the sand. "This is a joke," he said. "You have not fired a long-range shot in 18 months. You were a washout who got pulled from active duty because you could not handle the pressure. And now you want to walk onto my range and do what 13 of the best shooters in the Navy could not?" Voss met his eyes without flinching. Yes. The word hung in the air between them, simple and absolute. Falk looked from Voss to Crenshaw to Odom, searching for guidance. This is highly irregular. Odom finally spoke, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. She has the qualifications. She has the clearance. And unless I missed something, you just asked if anyone else wanted to try. Falk hesitated. The program was already dead. What harm could one more attempt do? Crenshaw saw the calculation happening in the commander's eyes. Sir, he said quickly, this is a mistake. She will embarrass the entire program. She will embarrass the teams. Odom turned to face him directly. 13 shooters have already failed, Senior Chief. Exactly how much more embarrassed can we get? The question landed like a blade. Crenshaw's jaw tightened, but he had no response. Falk made his decision. Chief Voss, he said slowly, you'll have one attempt. Tomorrow morning, 0600. If you fail, the program ends, and this conversation never happened. He paused. Do you understand what you are asking for? Voss looked past him toward the target shimmering in the distance. For 1,000 meters of desert and doubt. For 1,000 meters between who she used to be and who she might become. I understand, she said. I have understood for 18 months. She turned and walked away before anyone could respond, her folder of calculations pressed against her chest like a shield. Behind her, Crenshaw's voice rose in protest, but she did not hear the words. She heard only Danny, somewhere in the space between memory and hope. Tomorrow, she would either honor him or prove him wrong. There was no third option. The argument followed Voss across the range like a storm she could not outrun. Crenshaw's voice rose behind her, sharp and insistent, aimed at Lieutenant Commander Falk with the desperation of a man watching his kingdom crumble. Sir, this is beyond irregular. This is dangerous. He caught up to Falk near the command tent, positioning himself between the commander and the path Voss had taken. She has no business on that firing line. Her psychological evaluation after Hellman flagged her for combat stress. She requested removal from sniper duties herself. That is not someone we put in front of Washington brass with billions of dollars on the line. Falk stopped walking and turned to face him. I'm aware of her file, Senior Chief. Then you know this is a mistake. What I know is that 13 qualified shooters have failed to make this shot. Falk's voice carried the weariness of a man who had run out of good options. What I know is that my program is about to be canceled, and a chief petty officer with a Bronze Star just volunteered to take one more crack at it. He held up a hand before Crenshaw could interrupt. One attempt. If she misses, nothing changes. The program still ends. But if she hits, we all go home with careers intact, including you. Crenshaw's jaw worked silently. The logic was sound, and that made it worse. He had no argument that would not sound like wounded pride. Fine, he said finally. But when she chokes, when she freezes up the way she did in Afghanistan, I want it on record that I objected. Noted. Falk walked past him toward the command tent. Now if you will excuse me, I have calls to make. Crenshaw stood alone in the afternoon heat, watching Voss's distant figure disappear into the equipment building. His hands curled into fists at his sides. 12 years he had given to the teams. 12 years of being the best, of setting records that younger operators could only dream of matching. And now some broken washout was going to take his shot on his range in front of his peers. He would not let that happen, not without a fight. Inside the equipment room, Voss laid out her rifle on the cleaning bench. The weapon was a thing of precision, a Macmillan TC-50 that she had carried through 3 deployments. She had not fired it in 18 months, but her hands remembered every curve and angle as if no time had passed at all. She began the cleaning ritual, her movements automatic and soothing. Bore brush through the barrel, solvent on the action, fresh lubricant on the moving parts. The familiar motions quieted the noise in her head, pushing back the memories that threatened to surface every time she thought about what tomorrow would bring. A knock on the doorframe broke her concentration. Yates stood in the entrance, his expression somewhere between admiration and disbelief. That was either the bravest thing I have ever seen or the craziest. Maybe both. Voss did not look up from her work. Probably both. He stepped inside and leaned against a storage locker, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. You know Crenshaw is going to make your life hell between now and tomorrow morning. He has been making my life hell since I got here. This is not new. Yates was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something personal? Voss paused, the cleaning rod still in her hand. You can ask. What happened in Helmand? The real story, not whatever Crenshaw thinks he knows. The question hung in the air like smoke. Voss set down the cleaning rod and finally met his eyes. Her expression was guarded, but something flickered beneath the surface. Pain, maybe, or guilt. I had a spotter, she said slowly. Danny Reinhold. Best partner I ever worked with. We were supporting an extraction, 18 Marines pinned down by enemy fire. I made 11 shots that day, 11 kills, but there was a 12th target, an enemy sniper who had position on the Marine commander. She picked up a cloth and began wiping down the rifle's stock, her movements slower now. Danny spotted him first. The angle was bad. I could not get a clear shot from our position, so Danny moved to give me a better line of sight. He exposed himself to draw the enemy's attention. Yates did not speak. He barely breathed. I made the shot, Voss continued. Took out the sniper, saved the commander. But the enemy had a second shooter we did not see. Danny took the round meant for me. He died before the medevac arrived. The room felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in with the weight of her words. Crenshaw said you froze, Yates said quietly. Voss shook her head. I did not freeze. I made the shot. I saved 18 lives that day, but I could not save Danny. And afterward, I could not stop asking myself if there was another way. A better angle. A faster reaction. Something I missed that got him killed. She looked down at the rifle in her hands. So I requested removal from sniper duties. Not because I cannot shoot, because I was not sure I deserved to. Yates absorbed her words in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Danny moved because he trusted you to make the shot. He knew the risk. He made his choice. Voss did not respond. She resumed, cleaning the rifle, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. For what it is worth, Yates continued, I think he was right to trust you, and I think tomorrow you are going to prove it. He pushed off in the locker and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. I will be there at 0600. Someone should be in your corner. Voss looked up, something close to gratitude flickering in her eyes. Thank you. Yates nodded and disappeared into the fading afternoon light. Alone again, Voss finished her cleaning ritual and reassembled the rifle with mechanical precision. She checked the scope alignment, the trigger pull, the zero confirmation she had verified a dozen times before. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Except her. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the photograph. Danny's smile looked back at her, frozen in a moment before everything changed. She traced the edge of his face with her fingertip, remembering the sound of his voice, the way he laughed at her silence, the absolute certainty in his eyes when he told her she never missed. Tomorrow she would either prove him right or confirm her worst fears. There was no middle ground at 4,000 meters. She tucked the photograph away and picked up the rifle, feeling its familiar weight settle into her hands. Through the window, she could see the distant target, invisible in the gathering dusk but present nonetheless. Waiting. She would not sleep tonight. She knew that already. But she would be ready. She had to be. The barracks were silent at 0300, but Voss had not slept. She sat on the edge of her bunk with Danny's photograph in her hands, studying his face as if it might offer answers to questions she had been asking for 18 months. The moonlight through the window cast silver shadows across the room, turning everything into shades of gray. She remembered the first time Danny had spotted for her. A training exercise at Camp Pendleton, targets at 800 meters. He had talked constantly, a stream of observations and adjustments and terrible jokes that should have broken her concentration. Instead, she found his voice centering. He filled the silence she carried inside herself, and somehow that made her sharper. You are too quiet, he had told her afterward. It is creepy. How am I supposed to know what you are thinking if you never say anything? She had looked at him with the flat expression that intimidated most people. You are not supposed to know what I am thinking. Danny had laughed, completely unaffected. Fair enough, but I'm going to keep talking anyway. Consider a public service. He had kept that promise through 2 deployments. through firefights and boredom and everything in between. He talked, and she listened, and together they became something more effective than either could have been alone. Now his voice existed only in her memory, and the silence he had filled was deeper than ever. Voss tucked the photograph into her pocket and stood. Sleep was not coming, but preparation was always possible. She pulled on her boots and slipped out of the barracks into the cold desert night. The equipment room was dark when she arrived, but she knew the layout well enough to navigate by touch. She found the light switch and illuminated the space where her rifle waited on the cleaning bench. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Almost everything. She noticed the discrepancy immediately. The scope's elevation turret was rotated 2 clicks counterclockwise from where she had set it. A small change, barely visible, but enough to throw her zero off by several inches at 4,000 meters. Enough to guarantee a miss. Her hands did not shake as she examined the adjustment. Her breathing did not quicken. She simply stood in the harsh fluorescent light and understood what had happened. Someone had sabotaged her rifle. The list of suspects was short. Only a handful of people had access to this room, and only one had both the knowledge and the motivation to make such a precise adjustment. Crenshaw knew exactly what he was doing. A dramatic sabotage would be discovered and investigated. But 2 clicks on an elevation turret could be dismissed as a mistake, a nervous shooter double-checking her equipment and accidentally changing her settings. Voss corrected the adjustment and verified the zero against her original notes. She checked every other component of the rifle, searching for additional tampering. The trigger pull was correct. The barrel was clean. The ammunition was standard issue, unmarked and unmodified. Just the scope, just enough to make her fail. She considered her options. Report the tampering and watch Crenshaw deny everything while her credibility crumbled. Accuse a senior chief with a spotless record based on 2 clicks of a turret dial. Or say nothing. Fix the problem herself, and let her shooting speak louder than any accusation. The choice was not difficult. She finished her inspection and sat down on a crate near the workbench, her rifle across her knees. For hours until sunrise. For hours until she faced the shot that would define the rest of her career. For hours to quiet the voices in her head that whispered she did not deserve to be here. The door opened behind her. Master Chief Odom stepped into the light, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He did not seem surprised to find her here. Figured you would be awake, he said. Mind some company? Voss gestured to a nearby crate. He lowered himself onto it with the careful movements of a man whose body had absorbed decades of hard use. He handed her one of the cups, and they sat in silence for a long moment, steam rising between them. You found the adjustment, Odom said. It was not a question. Voss looked at him. You knew. I suspected. Odom took a sip of his coffee. Crenshaw is not subtle when he feels threatened. I came by earlier to check your equipment, but you had already secured the room. Figure I would wait and see if you caught it yourself. And if I had not, then I would have told you. He met her eyes. But I had a feeling you would not need my help. Voss absorbed his words. The trust implied in them was unexpected, almost uncomfortable. She was not used to people believing in her without demanding proof first. Why are you doing this? She asked. Helping me. You do not know me. Odom was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee as if reading something in its depths. 23 years ago, I was a young petty officer on my first deployment. Green as grass and twice as stupid. My platoon got ambushed outside Mogadishu. Worst day of my life. He paused, the memories playing behind his eyes. There was a shooter, a staff sergeant named Evelyn Cross. One of the first women to deploy with a combat unit. Half the platoon thought she had no business being there. The other half thought she would get us killed. What happened? She saved my life. Odom's voice was steady but heavy. Dragged me 200 yards under fire after I took shrapnel in both legs. Carried me on her back when I could not walk. And when we got to the extraction point, the same men who had doubted her lined up to shake her hand. He turned to face Voss directly. I learned something that day, Chief. Capability does not care about gender. Courage does not check your chromosomes. The only thing that matters is what you do when everything falls apart. He gestured toward her rifle. And I have read your file. I know what you did when everything fell apart in Helmand Province. Voss felt something shift in her chest. A wall she had built brick by brick over 18 months, loosening just slightly. I could not save Danny, she said quietly. No, Odom agreed. But you saved 18 other people. And Danny made his choice knowing exactly what he was risking. He paused. The question is not whether you could have done more. The question is whether you're going to let his sacrifice mean something. The words cut through the fog of guilt that had clouded her mind for so long. She had spent 18 months asking the wrong question. Not what she could have done differently, but what she was going to do now. For 1,000 meters waited outside. For 1,000 meters and the chance to prove that Danny was right about her. Her hands were steady as she lifted the rifle and checked the scope one final time. The zero was perfect. The weapon was ready. And somewhere deep inside herself, Linnea Voss was ready too. Almost. Odom left an hour before dawn, and Voss remained alone with her rifle and her thoughts. The coffee had gone cold in her hands, but she did not notice. Her mind was 18 months and 7,000 miles away, back in the mountains of Helmand Province, where everything had changed. The memory came whether she wanted it or not. They had inserted at 0400 a 6-hour hike through terrain that looked like the surface of Mars. Danny complained the entire way, his voice a constant murmur about the weight of his pack, the rocks in his boots, the absolute certainty that the intelligence was wrong and they would find nothing but goats at the target location. He was wrong about the goats. The Marines were pinned in a valley, 18 men trapped between a rock formation and 3 enemy positions on the surrounding ridges. The extraction helicopter had been driven off by heavy fire. Without support, they would be overrun within the hour. Voss and Danny set up on a ridge overlooking the valley. The range was extreme, over 1,500 meters to the farthest position, but the angles were clean and the wind was manageable. She settled behind her rifle and began the calculations that had become second nature. Danny spotted the first target. Shoot her on the north ridge, behind the boulder. 1,200 meters. Wind is 6 from the east. Voss made the adjustment and fired. The target dropped. Good hit, Danny confirmed. Next one is moving to the tree line. 1,300 meters. She fired again. Another kill. They worked through the enemy positions with methodical precision. One shot, one kill, over and over until the suppressing fire began to thin. The Marines started moving toward extraction. The plan was working. Then Danny spotted the sniper. He was hidden in a crevice on the eastern ridge, barely visible through the rocks. His rifle was trained on the Marine commander, a captain named Hernandez who was directing his men toward the helicopter landing zone. The angle from their position was impossible. Too much rock in the way, too many variables. I cannot get a shot, Voss said. The angle is wrong. Danny studied the terrain through his scope. There's a ledge about 40 meters east of us. Better line of sight, but it is exposed. She understood what he was suggesting. Moving to that ledge would put him in the open, visible to anyone watching the ridge. The enemy sniper might see him. Other shooters might see him. Danny, she said. His name was a warning. He was already moving. Just make the shot, Linnea. That is all you have to do. She watched him cross the open ground in a crouch, his body low against the rocks. Every second felt like an hour. She tracked the enemy sniper through her scope, watching for any sign that he had spotted Danny's movement. The enemy rifle stayed fixed on Captain Hernandez. Danny reached the ledge and dropped flat. He raised his spotting scope and found the target. I have him. 2,200 meters. Wind is shifting, call it 8 from the southeast. He paused, running calculations. Élévation plus fortitre. Windage left 17. Voss dialed the adjustments and settled her crosshairs on the crevice. The enemy sniper was a shadow among shadows, barely distinguishable from the rocks around him. One shot, one chance. She exhaled slowly, letting her heartbeat fade into the background. Her finger found the trigger. The enemy sniper moved, adjusting his position for a cleaner shot at Hernandez. Now, Linnea, Danny said. Take the shot. She fired. The bullet crossed 2,200 meters in just under 3 seconds. It found a gap in the rocks and struck the enemy sniper in the chest. He slumped forward, his rifle clattering against stone. Good hit, Danny confirmed. Target down. Relief flooded through her. The Marines were moving again. The extraction was going to succeed. Then she heard the crack. A second shooter, one they had not seen, hidden somewhere on the southern ridge. The round crossed the distance in an instant and found Danny on his exposed ledge. He did not cry out. He simply collapsed, his body going limp against the rocks. Voss did not remember moving. One moment she was behind her rifle, the next she was beside him, her hands pressing against the wound in his chest. Blood soaked through her fingers, hot and impossibly red against the gray stone. Danny looked up at her, his eyes already beginning to dim. His lips moved, forming words she had to lean close to hear. You never miss, Linnea. His voice was barely a whisper. Do not start now. His eyes closed. His breathing stopped, and Linnea Voss knelt alone on a mountain ridge with the body of the only person who had ever truly understood her. The extraction succeeded. 18 Marines went home to their families. Captain Hernandez received a Silver Star for his leadership under fire, and Chief Petty Officer Linnea Voss received a Bronze Star for valor and a psychological evaluation that recommended removal from sniper duties. She had not argued. She had not fought the recommendation. She had simply packed away her rifle and tried to forget the feeling of Danny's blood on her hands. But forgetting was not the same as healing, and running was not the same as moving forward. Voss opened her eyes. The equipment room materialized around her, harsh lights and concrete walls replacing the mountains of Afghanistan. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at them, watching the tremor that had plagued her for 18 months. The tremor that had convinced her she could not be trusted with a rifle. The tremor that Crenshaw pointed to as proof of her weakness. But as she watched, the shaking began to slow. The memory of Danny's last words echoed in her mind, not as a haunting, but as a command. You never miss. Do not start now. He had not said those words as a dying man offering comfort. He had said them as a spotter, giving his shooter a final instruction. The same way he had called out targets and wind adjustments. The same way he had guided her through 100 engagements. Danny had given her an order, and she had spent 18 months disobeying it. Voss stood and walked to the window. The first light of dawn was bleeding across the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, 4,000 meters away, a steel target waited. She was done running. She was done hiding. She was done letting guilt convince her that she did not deserve to be the person Danny believed she was. Today she would make the shot, not despite what happened in Helmand, but because of it. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much. The sun crested the mountains at 05:45, flooding the desert with light that burned away the last shadows of night. Voss stood outside the equipment building with her rifle case at her feet, watching the proving grounds come alive with activity. Vehicles moved toward the observation area. Personnel set up spotting equipment. The machinery of evaluation ground into motion for what everyone assumed would be the program's final hour. She felt different than she had the night before. The tremor in her hands was gone, replaced by a stillness that reached all the way to her core. Danny's words had settled something inside her, a piece that had been loose and rattling for 18 months finally clicking into place. Yates found her there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one without speaking, and they stood together watching the preparations unfold. How are you feeling? He asked after a moment. Ready. He nodded, accepting the single word as sufficient. I talked to some of the other guys last night. After what you said in the briefing room, after you volunteered. He paused. Not everyone agrees with Crenshaw. Some of them are hoping you make this shot. Voss glanced at him. Some of them. Baby steps. Yates smiled slightly. The teams are not exactly known for progressive thinking, but results change minds faster than arguments. You hit that target today, and a lot of opinions are going to shift. And if I miss, then you tried, which is more than most people can say. The simplicity of his statement carried more weight than any motivational speech could have. Voss felt something like gratitude stir in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth that she did not quite know how to express. Thank you, she said. for believing in me before you had any reason to." Yates shrugged. "I saw your calculations. That was reason enough." They walked together toward the firing line, where a small crowd had gathered near the observation platform. Lieutenant Commander Falk stood with several officers Voss did not recognize, men in pressed uniforms who had clearly traveled from Washington to witness the program's conclusion. Their presence added weight to an already heavy moment. Master Chief Odom waited near the firing position, his weathered face revealing nothing. He gave Voss a small nod as she approached, the gesture carrying more meaning than words could convey. Crenshaw stood apart from the others, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked Voss with an intensity that felt like pressure against her skin. She met his gaze without flinching and continued toward the firing line. "Chief Voss." She stopped. Crenshaw had moved to intercept her, positioning himself between her and the shooting platform. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "I know you found the adjustment," he said. His tone was conversational, almost casual. "It does not matter. You are still going to fail." Voss did not respond. She waited. Crenshaw stepped closer. "You want to know how I know?" "Because I knew Danny Reinhold. We served together in '09, before he transferred to your unit. He was a good man, a great spotter, but he made one mistake." The name hit her like a physical blow. She kept her expression neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "He believed in you," Crenshaw continued. "He talked about you constantly. Said you were the best natural shooter he had ever seen. Said you had ice in your veins and a computer for a brain." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He was wrong. "You're broken, Voss. You have been broken since the day he died. And no amount of calculations or preparation is going to change that." Voss felt the words trying to find purchase, trying to crack the foundation she had rebuilt over the past 12 hours. Crenshaw was not just attacking her competence. He was attacking her connection to Danny, trying to poison the memory that had finally become her source of strength. She thought about what Danny would say if he were here. She could almost hear his voice, cutting through Crenshaw's venom with characteristic irreverence. "This guy talks too much. Take the shot, Linnea." She looked at Crenshaw with eyes that had watched a man die and still found the strength to keep going. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "Danny did believe in me, and his last words were an order I have been disobeying for 18 months. She stepped past him toward the firing line. "I am done disobeying." Crenshaw grabbed her arm. She stopped but did not turn. "You are making a mistake," he said. "Maybe." Her voice was calm. "But it is my mistake to make." She pulled free and continued walking. Behind her, she heard Odom's voice, low and warning. "That is enough, Senior Chief. Let her shoot." Voss reached the firing position and set down her rifle case. The target waited in the distance, a steel silhouette shimmering in the morning heat. For 1,000 meters of doubt and possibility stretched between her and redemption. She knelt and opened the case, revealing the weapon that had been her companion through 3 deployments. Her hands moved automatically, assembling the bipod, checking the scope, loading the magazine with rounds she had inspected 3 times the night before. The crowd had fallen silent. She could feel their eyes on her back, the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. Somewhere among them, Crenshaw was watching with barely concealed contempt. Somewhere else, Yates and Odom were watching with something closer to hope. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the target downrange and the voice in her memory telling her she never missed. Voss settled into position behind the rifle. The stock pressed against her shoulder like an old friend. The scope filled her vision, magnifying the distant target until she could see the faint outline of scoring rings on its surface. She began her breathing ritual, slowing her heart rate to the steady rhythm that preceded every shot she had ever taken. The desert faded away. The crowd disappeared. Even Crenshaw's words lost their power, dissolving in a background noise that could not reach her in this space. There was only her and the rifle and 4,000 meters of morning air. And somewhere in the distance between memory and hope, Danny Reinhold's voice whispered its final instruction. "You never miss. Do not start now." The desert held its breath. Voss lay prone on the firing platform, her body forming a single line of purpose from her boots to her trigger finger. The rifle was an extension of herself now, its cold steel warming against her cheek as she pressed into the stock. Through the scope, the target floated in a sea of heat shimmer for 1,000 meters of atmosphere, bending the light into liquid waves. She began her assessment. Wind at ground level was negligible, barely 3 miles per hour from the southwest. But the flags at the 1,000-meter markers told a different story. They snapped eastward with increasing intensity, indicating a crosswind building in the middle distance. At 2,000 meters, the thermal layer she had predicted was forming, a band of superheated air that would push the bullet upward before the cooler atmosphere above corrected its path. These were the variables that had defeated 13 shooters before her. These were the invisible forces that turned precision into guesswork and certainty into hope. Voss did not guess. She calculated. The Coriolis effect at this latitude would drift the bullet approximately 8 inches to the right over 6 seconds of flight time. The air density at this altitude reduced muzzle velocity by roughly 40 feet per second compared to sea level. The Mirage Index suggested a vertical displacement of 6 inches at the target, meaning her point of aim needed to account for optical distortion the scope could not correct. She dialed her adjustments with micro-precise clicks of a turret. Elevation plus 47. Windage left 22. Each click was a prayer translated into mathematics, a hope expressed in mechanical increments. Behind her, the crowd waited in absolute silence. She could not see them, but she felt their presence like heat against her back. The Washington brass with their clipboards and their funding decisions. The operators who had failed before her, watching to see if she would join their ranks. Yates and Odom standing apart, willing her to succeed. And Crenshaw, his eyes boring into her spine, waiting for the moment her failure would prove him right. She dismissed them all. They belonged to a world outside the scope, and that world had ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Falk's voice cut through the stillness. Chief Voss, you may fire when ready. She did not acknowledge the command. Acknowledgement required thought, and thought required attention she could not spare. Her entire being had compressed into a single point of focus, a needle of concentration aimed at a target most people could not see with the naked eye. Her breathing slowed to 4 cycles per minute. Her heart rate dropped to 52 beats. The tremor that had plagued her for 18 months was gone, replaced by a stillness so complete that she could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. She watched the wind indicators. Waiting. The crosswind at the 1,000-meter mark was cycling in 45-second intervals, gusting and fading with the rhythm of the morning thermals. She had timed it during her calculations. She knew the pattern. She needed the gap between gusts, a window of relative calm that would last perhaps 8 seconds. The flag snapped eastward. Peak gust. Voss counted in her head. 1, 2, 3. The flags began to settle. 4, 5, 6. The window was opening. 7. She felt the moment arrive, like a physical sensation, an alignment of forces that existed for only a handful of heartbeats. The wind dropped. The Mirage stabilized. The target seemed to sharpen in her scope, the steel silhouette resolving from a shimmer into a solid shape. Now or never, Danny's voice whispered from somewhere deep in her memory. You never miss, Linnea. Her finger found the trigger. The metal was warm against her skin, familiar as a handshake from an old friend. She had pulled this trigger thousands of times in training, hundreds of times in combat. Every repetition had been preparation for this single moment. She exhaled slowly, emptying her lungs until her body was still as stone. The crosshairs settled on the center of the target. Her heartbeat faded into background noise. Between one breath and the next, she squeezed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, a controlled explosion that sent the bullet screaming downrange at 2,800 feet per second. The sound cracked across the desert like thunder, rolling out toward the mountains and echoing back in diminishing waves. Then silence. The bullet was invisible, a copper-jacketed messenger carrying the weight of her entire future through 4,000 meters of hostile air. It climbed through the thermal layer and began its descent. It pushed through the crosswind zone, drifting left as she had calculated, then correcting as the air currents shifted. It dropped 200 feet over the course of its flight, gravity pulling it down in a long parabolic arc that she had mapped in her mind before she ever touched the trigger. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The crowd held its breath. Even Crenshaw leaned forward, his contempt momentarily suspended by the primal tension of the weight. 4 seconds. 5. Voss did not move. Her eye remained pressed to the scope, watching the distant target with absolute focus. She had done everything within her power. The rest belonged to physics and fate. 6 seconds. The steel silhouette rang like a bell. The sound traveled back across the desert, faint but unmistakable. A hit. Center mass. For 1,000 meters. For a moment, nothing happened. The reality of what she had accomplished seemed too large to process, too improbable to accept. Then the spotter's voice cut through the silence, professional and precise. Impact confirmed. Center target. Approximately 2 inches right of absolute center. Voss still did not move. Her finger found the bolt and cycled a fresh round into the chamber. She made one shot. One shot proved nothing except luck. One shot could be dismissed as an anomaly, a fortunate alignment of variables that would never repeat. She settled back into position and found the target again. The window was closing. The wind was building. She had seconds at most. She fired. 5.8 seconds later, the target rang again. Impact confirmed, the spotter announced, his voice carrying an edge of disbelief. Center target. 1 inch left of absolute center. Voss chambered a third round. The window was gone now, the crosswind gusting hard enough to push the flags horizontal. Any reasonable shooter would wait for conditions to improve. She was not interested in reasonable. She calculated the new windage in her head, added 6 clicks to her adjustment, and fired into the teeth of the gust. The wait was longer this time. The bullet fought through turbulent air, pushed and pulled by forces that should have scattered it across the desert. It found its mark anyway. Impact confirmed. The spotter's voice cracked with emotion he could not suppress. Center target. 3 rounds. 3 hits. For 1,000 meters. Behind her, the silence finally broke. The desert erupted. Voices broke through the silence like water through a dam, a flood of exclamations and disbelief that washed over the proving grounds. Operators who had spent careers mastering the art of controlled emotion found themselves shouting, grabbing each other's shoulders, pointing toward the distant target as if confirming what their eyes refused to believe. Voss remained motionless behind her rifle. The scope still filled her vision, the target still centered in her crosshairs. 3 holes marked the steel silhouette, clustered within a space no larger than a dinner plate. At 4,000 meters, that grouping was not just impressive. It was impossible, except it was not impossible. She had just proven that. A hand touched her shoulder, gentle but insistent. She blinked and pulled back from the scope, the world expanding around her like a lens coming into focus. Yates crouched beside her, his face split by a grin so wide it looked almost painful. "You did it," he said. His voice carried the wonder of a man witnessing something sacred. "You actually did it." Voss sat up slowly, her muscles stiff from the tension she had held for what felt like hours. The crowd had surged toward the firing line, a mass of uniforms and excited chatter that pressed against the boundaries of military decorum. She saw faces she recognized and faces she did not, all of them wearing variations of the same stunned expression. Lieutenant Commander Falk pushed through the crowd, his composure cracked by something that looked almost like joy. "Chief Voss," he said, extending his hand. "I do not have words. I genuinely do not have words." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The contact felt strange, as if she had not touched another human being in years. "Thank you for giving me the chance, sir." Falk laughed, a short burst of relief and amazement. "Thank you for making me look like a genius for approving it." He turned to address the assembled personnel. "Gentlemen, I believe we have our proof of concept. Project Longbow is officially viable. A cheer went up from the crowd. The Washington brass were already huddled together, speaking in rapid tones that suggested careers being recalculated and budgets being revised. Voss caught fragments of their conversation. Unprecedented, game-changing, immediate implementation. She did not care about their words. She cared about the weight that had lifted from her chest, the silence where the guilt used to live. For 18 months, she had carried Danny's death like a stone around her neck. Now, finally, she had transformed that weight into something else. Not absolution, not forgetting, but purpose. Master Chief Odom appeared at her side, his weathered face creased by the closest thing to a smile she had ever seen him wear. Hell of a shot, Chief. He paused. Hell of 3 shots. I had a good teacher, Voss replied. Once. Odom nodded, understanding the reference without needing explanation. He will be proud of you. You know that. The words hit her harder than she expected. She felt tears threatening at the edges of her vision and blinked them back. Navy SEALs did not cry on the firing line, not even when they had just done the impossible. The crowd began to disperse, operators returning to their duties with a new energy that had not existed an hour before. Voss found herself surrounded by men who had doubted her, dismissed her, written her off as a support staffer who had no business touching a rifle. Now they approached with extended hands and words of congratulation. Their skepticism burned away by 3 holes in a steel target. She accepted their praise with quiet grace, nodding and shaking hands and offering the occasional word of thanks. It felt surreal, like watching someone else receive recognition for something she had done in a dream. Then she saw Crenshaw. He stood apart from the celebration, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression locked in the careful neutrality of a man processing something he could not accept. Their eyes met across the dispersing crowd. He did not look away. Voss excused herself from the well-wishers and walked toward him. The distance between them felt charged, electric with unspoken words and unresolved conflict. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak without being overheard. "Senior Chief," she said. "Chief." His voice was flat, stripped of the contempt that had colored every previous interaction. They stood in silence for a long moment. Around them, the proving grounds hummed with renewed purpose, personnel rushing to document the results and prepare reports for Washington. None of it touched the bubble of tension that surrounded them. "You were right about one thing," Voss said finally. "Danny did believe in me, and you were right that I was broken." She met his eyes without flinching. But broken things can be fixed, and sometimes they come back stronger. Crenshaw's jaw tightened. He looked like a man fighting against words that wanted to escape. "You got lucky," he said. "The conditions aligned. It will not happen again." Voss almost smiled. "Then I guess we will have to test that theory." She turned and walked away before he could respond. There would be time for further confrontation later, time for him to process what had happened and decide how to move forward. But right now, she had something more important to do. She found a quiet spot behind the equipment building, away from the crowds and the congratulations. The morning sun was climbing toward noon, burning away the last traces of desert chill. She leaned against the concrete wall and pulled the photograph from her pocket. Danny's face smiled up at her, frozen in a moment of joy she could barely remember. She traced the edge of his jaw with her fingertip, feeling the worn paper beneath her touch. "I did it," she whispered. 3 shots, for 1,000 meters, just like you always said I could. The photograph did not answer. It never would. But somewhere in the space between memory and hope, she could almost hear his voice. "I know. I never doubted you." Voss closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Not tears of grief this time. Tears of release. Tears of a wound finally beginning to heal. She had carried his death for 18 months. Now, at last, she could carry his memory instead. The evening brought a different kind of chaos. Word of Voss's achievement had spread beyond the proving grounds, racing through military channels with the speed of wildfire. By the time the sun touched the western mountains, calls were coming in from commands across the country. Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, the Pentagon's Advanced Weapons Division, even a quietly worded inquiry from an agency that did not officially exist. Voss sat in Lieutenant Commander Falk's office, surrounded by communications equipment that had not stopped buzzing since noon. The room felt too small for the magnitude of what was happening, its institutional furniture and fluorescent lights absurdly mundane against the backdrop of history being made. "Chief Voss," Falk said, setting down his phone for what seemed like the 100th time, "you have officially broken the Navy record for longest confirmed shot." He paused, letting the words settle. "You have also broken the Department of Defense record. And as far as we can determine from available intelligence, you have broken the world record." Voss absorbed the information with the same stillness she had maintained on the firing line. Numbers and records felt abstract, distant from the personal meaning of what she had accomplished. "I was not trying to break records, sir. I know. That is what makes it more impressive." Falk leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mixture of respect and calculation. "The question now is what happens next. Washington wants to talk about your future. Project Longbow wants you as lead instructor for the program you just validated. And I have received 3 separate requests from Tier 1 units asking about your availability for deployment." Deployment. The word carried weight she had not expected to feel. 18 months ago, she had walked away from operational status because she could not trust herself. Now the path back was opening, and she was not sure she was ready to walk it. "Can I have some time to think?" she asked. Falk nodded. "Take the night. But Voss," he added as she rose to leave, "whatever you decide, know that you have options now that you did not have yesterday. You earned them." She stepped out of the office into the corridor, where the evening light filtered through dusty windows. The base had quieted as personnel dispersed to their quarters, the frenetic energy of the afternoon settling into a calmer rhythm. She walked without destination, letting her feet carry her through familiar paths while her mind processed the day's events. She found herself at the range. The firing line was empty now, the equipment packed away, and the observation platforms abandoned. Only the target remained in the distance, invisible in the fading light, but present nonetheless. 3 holes in steel for 1,000 meters away, marking the spot where everything had changed. "Thought I might find you here." Yates emerged from the shadows near the equipment shed, his hands tucked into his pockets. He walked over and stood beside her, both of them facing the darkness where the target waited. "Hell of a day," he said. "Hell of a day," she agreed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who had become unexpected allies over the course of 72 hours. The desert cooled around them, the heat of the day bleeding away into the clear night sky. "I heard Falk talking about deployment options," Yates said eventually. "You thinking about going back to operational status?" Voss considered the question. A week ago, the answer would have been immediate and absolute. No, never. She had convinced herself that her days of combat were over, that the safest place for her was behind a desk or in a support role where her failures could not cost lives. But that was before she remembered who she was, before she remembered who Danny believed she could be. "I do not know yet," she admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me is still afraid." "Afraid of what?" She turned to look at him, her pale eyes catching the last light of dusk. "Afraid that the next time someone trusts me to make a shot, I will not be able to save them." She paused. "Danny trusted me, and he died anyway." Yates was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I have been thinking about what you told me. About Danny moving to give you the angle. About him making that choice knowing the risk." He shifted his weight, turning to face her directly. "The way I see it, Danny did not die because you failed. He died because he succeeded. He did his job. He gave you the shot you needed to save 18 people. And then he got unlucky." Voss felt the words settle into her chest, filling spaces that had been empty for too long. It was the same truth Odom had offered, the same reframing that had allowed her to step onto the firing line this morning. But hearing it from Yates, from someone who had only known her for 3 days, gave it a different weight. "You do not owe him your guilt," Yates continued. "You owe him your best. And from what I saw today, your best is pretty damn good." She almost smiled. "Pretty damn good. Record-breaking, actually, but I did not want to brag." The tension broke, and Voss felt something like laughter building in her chest. It escaped as a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close enough. She had not laughed in 18 months. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Yates shrugged. "You did the hard part. I just made coffee and offered moral support." They walked back toward the barracks together, the desert stretching dark and silent around them. Tomorrow would bring more decisions, more conversations, more pressure from commands that wanted to claim a piece of what she had accomplished. But tonight, she could simply exist in the aftermath of her own success. She had made the impossible shot. 3 times. She had proven that Danny's faith was not misplaced. Now she had to decide what to do with the future she had just created. The stars emerged overhead, scattered across the sky like bullet holes in black velvet. Voss looked up at them and thought about all the shots she had yet to take, all the distances she had yet to cross. For the first time in 18 months, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like a target waiting to be hit. The knock came at 0600, just as Voss finished lacing her boots. She opened the door to find Master Chief Odom standing in the corridor, his expression carrying the weight of something unspoken. "Senior Chief Crenshaw wants to talk to you," he said. "He is at the range." Voss felt her body tense, the old wariness rising like a reflex. "What does he want?" "Did not say." Odom studied her face for a moment. "But I think you should hear him out." Man looked like he had not slept all night. She considered refusing. After everything Crenshaw had done, the sabotage, the psychological attacks, the years of dismissive contempt, she owed him nothing. But something in Odom's tone suggested this was not another confrontation. Something had shifted. She nodded and followed him out into the morning light. The desert was quiet at this hour, the proving grounds empty except for a single figure standing near the firing line. Crenshaw faced the distant target, his back to her approach, his posture lacking the rigid confidence she had come to associate with him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by something she could not yet name. Odom stopped 50 yards away. "I will wait here," he said. "Take your time." Voss walked the remaining distance alone. Her boots crunched on the packed sand, announcing her arrival, but Crenshaw did not turn. She stopped beside him and waited. The silence stretched between them, filled by the whisper of wind across the desert floor. Finally, Crenshaw spoke. "I lied to you." The words were flat, stripped of the bravado that had defined every previous interaction. Voss did not respond. She waited for him to continue. "About Danny." He still did not look at her. "I did serve with him in 09. That part was true, but he never said you were not ready. He never expressed any doubt about you at all." His jaw tightened. "I made that up because I wanted to break you." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Voss felt anger stirring in her chest. The familiar heat of resentment she had carried since the first day Crenshaw dismissed her as a support staffer who did not belong. But beneath the anger, she found something unexpected. Curiosity. "Why?" she asked. Crenshaw was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "Because you terrified me." Voss blinked. Of all the responses she had anticipated, that was not among them. "Terrified you?" He turned to face her finally, and she saw what Odom had described. A man who had not slept. A man wrestling with something he could not defeat. "I have been the best for 12 years, he said. "Every record, every commendation, every mission where someone needed the impossible shot, they called me." His eyes were hollow, haunted by a truth he was only now confronting. "Then you showed up, this quiet woman who never talked, never bragged, never demanded attention. And I saw your file. I saw what you did in Helmand. And I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were better than me." He exhaled slowly, the admission costing him something vital. "I have known it since the first day you arrived. I just could not accept it. So I convinced myself you were broken, that your silence was weakness, that your request for removal proved you could not handle the pressure." He shook his head. "I needed you to fail, because if you succeeded, everything I built my identity around would crumble." Voss absorbed his words, searching for the anger she expected to feel. It was there, simmering beneath the surface, but it no longer burned the way it once had. She had spent too long carrying resentment for things she could not change. She was not interested in adding more weight. "You sabotaged my rifle," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact. Crenshaw nodded. 2 clicks on the elevation turret. Enough to guarantee a miss if you did not catch it. He met her eyes without flinching. I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of any of this. The silence returned, but felt different now. Cleaner somehow, stripped of the hostility that had defined their relationship. Danny told me something once, Voss said finally. He said the best shooters are not the ones who never miss. They're the ones who learn from every shot, good or bad. She paused. I think that applies to more than just shooting. Crenshaw stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. Is that forgiveness? No. Voss kept her voice even. Forgiveness takes time. This is just acknowledgement. You told me the truth. That took courage, even if it came late. He nodded slowly, accepting her terms. For what it is worth, he said, what you did yesterday was the finest shooting I have ever seen. And I have seen a lot. The compliment landed without fanfare, a simple statement of fact from a man who had spent 3 days trying to destroy her. Voss considered how to respond. Danny used to say something else, she said. He said the only competition that matters is the one you have with yourself. She looked at Crenshaw with eyes that had seen too much to hold grudges. Maybe it is time you started believing that. She turned and walked back toward Odom, leaving Crenshaw alone on the firing line. Behind her, she heard no response. None was needed. Odom fell in a step beside her as she approached. How'd it go? Voss considered the question. Better than expected, she said. Worse than it should have been. That sounds about right for Senior Chief Crenshaw. They walked in silence toward the command building, where Falk and the Washington brass were waiting with papers to sign and futures to discuss. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill, promising another day of desert heat. Do you think he will change? Voss asked. Odom was quiet for a moment. I think he will try. Whether trying is enough remains to be seen. He glanced at her. The question is whether you care either way. Voss thought about Danny, about the 18 months she had spent punishing herself for something that was never her fault. She thought about the weight she had carried and the shot that had finally set her free. I care about moving forward, she said. Whatever that looks like for him is his business. I have my own path to walk. Odom nodded, a hint of approval in his weathered features. That is the right answer, Chief. They reached the command building, where the next chapter of her life waited behind institutional doors. Voss paused at the entrance, taking one last look at the desert that had changed everything. Then she stepped inside, ready to become whoever she was meant to be. 2 weeks later, Voss stood at the gates of Arlington National Cemetery. The morning was soft and gray, a gentle rain falling from clouds that seemed to understand the weight of this place. She wore her dress uniform for the first time in 18 months, the ribbons on her chest catching what little light filtered through the overcast sky. The bronze star hung among them, no longer a reminder of failure, but a testament to what she and Danny had accomplished together. She had not visited his grave since the funeral. She had told herself it was because of the distance, the demands of service, the logistics of travel. But the truth was simpler and harder. She had not been ready to say goodbye. Now she was. The cemetery stretched before her in precise rows, white headstones marking the final resting places of men and women who had given everything for their country. She walked among them with reverent steps, following a path she had memorized but never traveled. Section 60. Row 7. Third stone from the end. Danny's name was carved in clean letters, his rank and dates framing a life cut short. Petty Officer Second Class Daniel James Reinhold. Beloved son, brother, and friend. The words seemed inadequate for the man who had changed her life, but words always were. Voss knelt before the headstone, the wet grass soaking through her uniform trousers. She did not care. Some moments demanded discomfort. Hey, Danny, she said softly. Sorry it took me so long. The rain whispered against the stone, filling the silence she had always carried. She reached out and traced the letters of his name, feeling the grooves beneath her fingertips. I made the shot. She smiled, the expression feeling strange and right at the same time. Actually, I made 3 shots for 1,000 meters. You would have loved it. You would have talked about it for weeks, driven everyone crazy with the details. She paused, her throat tightening. I wish you could have been there to see it. The clouds shifted overhead, and for a moment, a shaft of pale sunlight broke through the gray. It illuminated the headstone, turning the white marble luminous. I spent 18 months blaming myself for what happened, Voss continued. 18 months believing I did not deserve to keep shooting because I could not save you. But I understand now. You made your choice. You gave me the angle because you trusted me to make the shot. And I did. She exhaled slowly. The only thing I did wrong was forgetting that you would have wanted me to keep going. She reached into her pocket and withdrew something small. A challenge coin, freshly minted, bearing the insignia of Project Longbow. On the reverse side, for numbers were stamped in bold relief. 4,000. They gave me this yesterday, she said. First official long-range qualification coin in the program. Falk said I should keep it somewhere special. She placed the coin at the base of the headstone, leaning it against the marble. I figured this was the most special place I know. She stood slowly, her knees protesting the cold and damp. The rain had softened to a mist, gentler now, as if the sky itself was easing its grief. I'm going back to operational status, she said. Falk offered me lead instructor for Longbow, but I turned it down. There's still shots that need to be made, still people who need someone watching over them. She straightened her uniform, squaring her shoulders. I'm going to be that someone. For you. For everyone like you who believes in someone else so much they're willing to risk everything. The cemetery was silent except for the soft patter of rain on stone. Voss stood at attention before Danny's grave, offering the salute she had been unable to give at his funeral. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. You never doubted me, she whispered. I am done doubting myself. She held the salute for a long moment, then lowered her hand. The rain continued to fall, washing over the headstones, carrying away the dust of time. She took one last look at Danny's name, memorizing the way the letters caught the light. Then she turned and walked away. The path back to the gate felt different than the path in, lighter somehow, as if she had left something heavy behind. Not Danny's memory, that she would carry forever, but the guilt, the doubt, the suffocating weight of what she had believed was her failure. Those she left at his grave, offerings to a man who had never wanted her to carry them in the first place. At the gate, a car waited. Yates leaned against the hood, an umbrella in his hand, despite the fact that the rain had nearly stopped. He straightened when he saw her approach. How is it? He asked. Voss considered the question. Necessary, she said. And good. He nodded, understanding without needing details. The car was warm and dry, a contrast to the damp morning outside. As they pulled away from the cemetery, Voss watched the white headstones recede in the side mirror. Where to now? Yates asked. Voss thought about the future stretching before her. The deployments waiting, the shots yet to be taken, the lives yet to be saved. For 18 months, she had been frozen, trapped in a moment of grief that had stolen everything she was. Now she was free. Coronado, she said. I have a team waiting for me. The car merged onto the highway, carrying her toward whatever came next. Behind her, Arlington faded into the distance. Ahead, the road stretched toward a horizon she was finally ready to meet. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to the whole story. Drop a comment and let us know what moved you the most, or share if you have ever watched someone you love overcome the impossible. Your stories matter just as much as hers. Linnea Voss had spent 18 months believing she was broken. It took 3 shots at 4,000 meters to prove that she was not. But the truth was simpler than that. She had never been broken. She had just forgotten how to see herself clearly. Danny had always seen her, and now, finally, she could see herself too. The road unwound before her, mile after mile of possibility. She settled back in her seat and watched the world pass by. She never missed, and she never would.